New year, new anime, but still the same old me. How the hell does that keep happening? Probably because I had the same garbage taste as always. What can I say? If the formula ain't broke, don't fix it. My eyeballs yearn for the trash heap, which means I had to pick shows to kick off this winter season. Want a little behind the scenes on how I pick said shows? Simple. I hacked into Mappa and entered show names as employees. Whichever got let go for failing to meet unreasonable deadlines were my winners. Hey, I'm more proud of myself for not making a joke about Israel this season, so let's just take what little wins we can. Anyway, I've got a hell of a roster. Bottom tier character Tomozaki is back to try and out trash tier yours truly. Mahou Shoujo ni Akogarete reminds us to be gay and do crime. Trigger serves Dungeon Meshi up on a platter because food and fantasy go together like peanut butter and jelly. Mato Seihei no Slave continues Japan's sadist awakening. I was getting excited that I might avoid Isekai for a whole season, until my instant death ability is so overpowered hit me with instant regret. Nozomanu Fushi no Boukensha teaches us the value of never giving up on your dreams, even if you die in the process. I'm getting some real bad redo of healer flashbacks from Chiyu Mahou no Machigatta Tsukaikata. Yubisaki to Renren fills the dark void we all have in our hearts with fluffy romance. Solo leveling is what you get when Korea's MMO brain rot festers for way too long. The Edge is back, and as non-threatening as always with the Dangers in My Heart second season. And so is Banished from the Heroes Party, where we say I can't believe it's not a harem. Dupu Nanakai Me no Akiyakurejo gives us the old adage, reincarnate once, shame on you. Reincarnate 7 times, shame on me. Kyujitsu no Warumono-san shows us what happens when a villain nopes out of his own story. Hokkaido gals are super adorable realizes every teenage boy's dream, talking to a girl. I'm pretty sure the consequences of this show up somewhere in the Bible, but Orakana Tenshi wa Akamato Odoro has an angel and demon falling in love. Villainous anime is having a field day with Akiyakurejo Rebu Kyuju-Kyu. Cherry Magic shows us the path all virgin men in their 30s flirt with at one point or another. Bones Asimov's its way into Metallic Rouge, with androids killing robots in space. Majo to Yaju takes witch hunts to the extreme. And lastly, a biopic about my life. I mean, The Weakest Tamer began a journey to pick up trash. Not related, I swear. There's a hell of a spread here, but what's standing out this season? Let's take a look. First up is the return of Tomozaki. I rated the first season of this show a lot higher than I probably should have. In retrospect, it didn't really land that well for me, as it felt like it should have been better than it actually was. A loser gamer guy getting a change of perspective on life, guided by his rival/love interest into being a more interesting person, but under no illusions this isn't shallow as hell. Character growth was there and good, but that's about all it had going for it, and only for the main dude. Why it didn't really seem to land for me was a glacial pacing, cringy plot at times, and a fairly unremarkable supporting cast. And honestly, in hindsight, I think Project Number 9's just a turnoff for a studio for me these days because of just how little they try after their first few episodes, while slapping on filters and overlays to make up for their bland art and cinematography. How does the second season live up to the first? Well, more of the same, and as far as sequels go, that's pretty much the bare minimum, which isn't super great. There wasn't any real big plot points pushing us into this season, so it felt like any other episode instead of a triumphant return. Obviously, if you enjoyed the first season, check it out, but for newcomers, unless you really like low-stakes drama and a lot of steady character development, this may be a bit too slow to actually pick up. Gushing over Magical Girls is next. Let's just hope that's getting overly excited for the sake of my monetization. A plain and sorta gloomy kind of girl who's always loved magical girls suddenly gets approached by some mascot type character and is given powers. That's her dream come true, right? Only one problem. She was given powers by the evil organization to be a villain, and not an actual magical girl. So rather than get into a fight, she decides to lay low, but that doesn't work, especially when she's blackmailed into it, because the local magical girls kick in her metaphorical door to throw down. And upon kicking their asses with the power she's been given, she's suddenly hit with an earth-shattering realization that she's a massive sadist, and this is, in fact, her fetish. This show is unabashedly horny, feeling like what Super X Eros did, but for magical girls rather than Sentai. So gratuitous nudity, sexual situations, and adult jokes, which is admittedly a turnoff for some viewers on its own. On the flip side of that, it's honestly a fairly well done magical girl comedy that almost parodies the pornographic side of the genre in a way. How it approaches the magical girl genre from the villain side in a sincere but comedic light reminds me of a raunchier, less slice of life focused Demon Girl Next Door. But you know, the main girl is actually good at her job, so it's a unique take on how evil organizations operate in these shows. On a broader scope, the character motivations, dynamics, and jokes all work well to create an adult-oriented series that's fun, all things considered, so check it out, if you're okay with pausing every few seconds to make sure no one's looking over your shoulder. Oh great, from lust to gluttony, we're looking at Delicious in Dungeon. So a major questline goes out that a mad wizard sunk an entire rich city into a dungeon, and everyone's rushing to claim that wealth for themselves. Only problem is, it's dangerous as hell, and our intrepid group of adventurers loses the main character's sister to a dragon. As a result, they barely make it out when she teleports them away, and instead of just giving up, they say screw that. They're going right back in despite not having the supplies to manage. They'll just eat the monsters they find along the way. Sounds easy, right? Only problem is, monsters are pretty poisonous and kind of a pain in the ass to cook, but lucky them. They happen upon a monster cooking expert who really likes the idea of cooking up a dragon, and joins them on their quest to save their lost party member. Honestly, it delivers on that premise entirely, as a fun romp using fantasy tropes as a source of comedy. Yeah, it's not groundbreaking in what it offers, but it does it well, by giving a somewhat lackadaisical approach to its story while still taking it at face value. There's a dry wit to the jokes punctuated by over-the-top reactions, which is generally my sense of humor, honestly, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. But the animation is probably where this one shines the most. It's fairly detailed, and the cooking scenes, the main draw of the series here, stand out as particularly nice. The mashing of cooking and fantasy has been done more than a few times now, but what drew me to this one was the studio. Trigger has fun when they release anime, and this one really delivers on the premise while being a visual treat. Now, it doesn't have their usual style of animation, but undeniably has their unique mixture of comedic timing and action that's appreciated. If you're looking for a bit less of a serious fantasy series this season, this is by far worth a look. Japan's sadist streak continues this season with Chain Soldier, in a version of Japan where misogynism is replaced by misandry because women get superpowers by eating a fruit to fight evil invading fantasy monsters, as they do, while men are just worthless. A guy finds himself trapped by said monsters in this other world. Lucky for him, he's saved by some demon hunters, and they keep him as a mascot character for shits and or giggles. And by mascot character, I of course mean the main girl who uses her powers to make him into a battle slave. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but essentially it swaps gender norms for comedy while focusing on some strangely gratuitous scenes. The main guy, being the main girl's willing slave, gains the strength to exact revenge for his killed sister, and be the hero he's always wanted, despite being powerless before, by transforming into a monster to battle these demonic threats, which is typical anime bullshit, we've seen that a million times, but with the added twist of random sadism for the sake of, you know what, honestly I couldn't tell you. Shits and or giggles again, I guess. The power system is on the more unique side, but also isn't really explained or easily understood, which just sorta makes you shrug, as anything could be pulled out of someone's ass at the last second. As for the art and animation, it falls in a weird place where it's decently done, but not particularly impressive or eye-catching. That's partially due to the setting having muddy browns and purples to sell that whole parallel world thing, and while thematic, it doesn't really make the series pleasant to look at. Combined with lackluster cinematography, it left me wanting. This game across is just extremely okay and nothing to really get me excited for. Hell, with this premise and twists, I should have found at least something that left an impression on me, and I just didn't. Worse than a bland action series is extra bland Isekai, and my instant death ability is so overpowered no one in this other world stands a chance against me fits that to a T. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but a guy and his entire class get transported to a fantasy world, and he's left to die. No, it's not Arifureta. This guy slept through the whole ordeal, and when his classmates abandon him to be eaten by a dragon after getting their own fantasy powers, he decides to activate his instant death ability, which kills whatever he wants, and that he's always had apparently, saving him and the other girl who didn't get powers. Wow, talk about lazy writing. Now he and that girl are adventuring, I guess. And this tries to be a lot more bloody than it can actually get away with, and you could probably tell it would lean into the edgy territory with that title alone, but it lacks the time slot or animation to effectively pull off the senseless violence it wants to. So ineptly bloody, bland premise, and it tops that off with one-note characters, because the main dude's blasé attitude gets old quick. When you're writing an adventure series, having uninterested characters makes it that much harder for the viewers to get invested. So what's keeping me watching? Not much. I already touched on it a bit, but the look of this series is fairly bad, with flat art, barely cohesive style, and a really boring shot composition that does nothing to highlight what this series is trying to make cool. Here's a pro tip. You can tell when a series is being lazy because it uses filters and effects to ramp up its tension, rather than, trying to show it visually, and that's pretty much this one in a nutshell. Unless you're a connoisseur of bad isekai, give it a pass. Oh great. The fantasy rampage continues, with the unwanted undead adventurer. I was actually interested in this one due to its premise. An adventurer heads into a dungeon to do his daily trash clear because, despite his years of experience, he's barely any stronger than a noob, only to find himself face to face with a dragon by accident, and that lasts all of 2 seconds, because he's promptly swallowed and digested. Well, that was a quick show, run credits I guess, if only the rest were that fast. Oh wait, he comes back as a skeleton? Never mind. So his quest log updates to level himself up enough that he can pass for human, and return home with no one the wiser. Best of luck to him. In terms of fantasy, this one is better than most, as there's a more unique design to the series, and the setting actually feels lived in, creating a not so generic story, despite using a lot of tired tropes, which gives it a leg to stand on in terms of if it's going to be an enjoyable watch, because it shows it cares about the story it's trying to tell. Hell, I love how this dude being turned into a skeleton is actually treated as an obstacle, and doesn't automatically make him stronger. Art-wise, it's fairly decent looking. I talked about the setting feeling lived in, and that's due to the small details added that give a sense of scope. Buildings aren't cut and paste or pristine. The color choices even emphasize the story being told. But what I found the most impressive was the use of the 3D elements. This isn't a CG only series, but how it incorporates the main character into the traditional art stands out in the first episode, showing they're putting in the effort. Combined with a fairly strong story and a sincerity in how it approaches the premise, it's a solid fantasy entry this season. I can't tell if I'm numb to the prevalence of fantasy and isekai anime these days, but we're looking at yet another with the wrong way to use healing magic. A painfully average guy is teleported to a fantasy world after befriending the 2 most popular and gifted kids in his school. But in this world, he actually gets to be a main character too, instead of just a background one, because he got an affinity for healing magic, which is apparently pretty rare. And that unfortunately draws the attention of a fellow white mage who's batshit crazy. So what we're looking at is a fairly standard isekai affair, but strangely more competent than other series in the genre. It takes the time to establish the cast, their dynamic, and actually treats it with some gravitas for a late stage isekai story. Most just gloss over this crap to go right to that whole being OP thing, but this is a bit more focused on characters, and I actually appreciate that. But let's talk a bit more about how it actually executes its premise. And the fact that it doesn't gloss over this crap does mean it's a bit of a slow burn. The problem with that is the story doesn't really grab you from the get-go, and it's not until the tail end of the episode we get an idea what this main dude's goal is gonna be. Or what type of story this actually is, which doesn't really excite me for the series as a whole. The animation for this one is a bit deceptive. It has a fairly plain presentation, but a lot of attention to detail, creating a crisp, clean look while not cutting corners or being overly produced. So not much flair, but strong fundamentals create an above average experience. But where does this land? I guess it's a pretty safe bet in terms of isekai. It has more of a chance for upward mobility based on how the actual plot develops. So if you're really hurting for isekai, check it out. Isekai and fantasy are pretty close to breaking me at this point, so let's go for something completely different, with a sign of affection. A hearing impaired girl lives a pretty sheltered life. That is until she has a chance run-in with her best friend's acquaintance, a guy who isn't put off by her disability, and since he's been overseas, is a pretty worldly type. That means she's interested, especially after he saves her from a random encounter with a foreigner. This is a pretty strong contender in the romance genre, as it has a strong thematic through-line for the relationship to follow. A girl living her life in silence without much interaction outside her family and friend circle, suddenly having this embodiment of the outside world that actually accepts her and is even interested. Oh wait, the fact he's hot as hell definitely helps out. On top of having an adult cast, a university setting, and unique characters, there's a lot that makes this appealing, especially in the current anime market. The cast is both likable and refreshing, while filling me with a warm feeling seeing them hit it off. I think it's tackling some tall subject matters with grace. The first episode is incredibly solid at establishing characters and getting you invested in them and their relationship. Bonus, the 2 leads are extremely forward about their feelings, so no pointless dancing around this whole will they won't they bullshit. The production here is honestly fantastic. A strong use of shot composition, color, animation, and hey, sound design too, because that's part of what sells one of the main characters. How they depict her own little world with stark color changes really highlights the disconnect she feels from others, and it's a nice touch. I'm a sucker for love stories, and this one left a really good first impression. If you're looking for a romance anime to pick up this season, this is honestly a no-brainer. Oh great. Right back into fantasy hell, because I'm not escaping the stranglehold it has on the anime industry currently. Solo Leveling is about a guy who lives in the modern day after some weird gates open up to a fantasy world. Some people got superpowers as a result. You know, the standard fantasy shit. Healing, spellcasting, enhanced strength. And those people are called hunters. How original. And hey, that's our dude, he's one of them. Except he's weak as hell and his team got wiped out on a raid one day. And that's when his quest log updates from pay mom's medical bills to go grind, you dumbass scrub. And now he's off to become the world's strongest through, you guessed it, solo leveling. And then everyone clapped. So with a bare bones premise like that, what's this one actually offer? Well, a struggle for self-improvement and defying the odds, packing all the action and brutality manhwa adaptations tend to bring, with a decent studio backing it all up too. Yeah, it's basic in its premise and execution, while distilling hype and power fantasy right into your veins. Yeah, I can already tell this show will be incredibly hit or miss. People will either like it or hate it, with very little in between. And my opinion on this is how well you can tolerate generic elements. If it doesn't bother you that you've seen countless stories like this, you'll probably think it's fantastic. But if you're expecting subverted expectations or some deeper meaning, yeah, not so much. As for the animation, A1 Pictures has a pretty solid track record as being a good workhorse studio. This is just done well enough to not overshadow the story being told. It's essentially invisible, which I guess works to this anime's benefit. The art is clean, detailed, and flows well, but it also doesn't really do much to impress me, especially from a directorial perspective, as it has some very safe shot choices and doesn't really do much to engage with its action. All I can say is, I'm essentially underwhelmed. The Dangers in My Heart has its second season rolling out, and this was one of my top picks back in spring 2023, and for good reason. It's a slow burn rom-com about an edgelord building a relationship with one of the popular girls at his school, but honestly pretty well paced, and creating a nice character dynamic between the two leads. The supporting cast is fun, adds some variety to the straight man routine on display, and ultimately makes for a cute, enjoyable experience. The guy losing his shit over the girl being an idiot while also supporting her so she doesn't fail, and her ineptly trying to support him in turn is just a good vehicle for comedy, while showcasing the nuances of their relationship. So how does this season stack up to the last? Pretty well, honestly. It maintains the animation quality, and the staff are about as dedicated to this story as they were in their previous outing. And that's just what happens when you have staff continuity between seasons. I won't pretend this is a groundbreaking anime, but it knows what it's doing, and it does it well, by giving us the social awkwardness of a kid finding his place in life with a strong personal moral sense, and a girl who's an absolute airhead but also just as awkward, just in a different way. If you liked the first season, there's a lot to be pleased about going into this one, and if you didn't watch, check it out for a pretty good rom-com. Hey, I've been expecting you. We're about halfway through the video, so you know what that means. Or you're new here and maybe you don't. In which case, this is where I basically waste time to stick an ad break in. Maybe you got one and maybe you didn't. How about this? Comment below and tell me which. It's good for the algorithm. Anyway, back to more shows. The season 2s just keep on rolling with our second installment of Banished from the Heroes Party. I ranked this series pretty highly back in 2021, because while the whole Banished from the Hero Party is a subgenre in itself now, this one was more focused on what actually retiring from adventuring would look like. It deals with more slice-of-life style problems, while building a bigger narrative in the background around the whole hero and demon lord dynamic, and what capped it off was a strong romance between the two leads, Red and Rit. And as corny as it may seem, I like the more existential issues this tackles, about the nature of heroes in fantasy worlds. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So how does this second season fare? Well, it's another case of a returning studio with returning staff. We already talked about how well that works for a new season of a show, and with most of the core cast firmly established and now centrally located after that whole incident culminating in the hero reuniting with her brother, on top of her regaining her connection to humanity, we're diving more into the slower paced stuff to get us grounded as the next chapter ramps up. I like this series because it melds the more mundane aspects and character moments into a relaxed anime with a deeper story that I expect from adventure, while adding a good romance on top of it, creating an incredibly well-rounded package that offers a little something for everyone. If you're looking for a good fantasy series to settle into, this might be up your alley. The fact that Japan is running on about 3 ideas these days is pretty annoying, and the overused idea this time is villainous, with 7th time loop. The villainess enjoys a carefree life married to her worst enemy. So some villainess gets killed by public enemy number 1, and instead of dying, she wakes up when her engagement was first cancelled. Sounds crazy, but this isn't even her first go-around. She's stuck in a time loop, and doing everything right using the knowledge she's built over her past few go-arounds to live a carefree life. So, for starters, while this is clearly in the villainous genre, it avoids a lot of the usual trappings. This is primarily focused on telling this character's story, not just another villainous one. She has a ton of agency, in spite of her circumstances, because, well, that's pretty much what developed her mindset, while also actually engaging with the whole time loop aspect. So, after learning a ton and doing so much good in her past lives, trying to avoid the inevitable war that gets her killed, creates a strong story for us to follow. Most anime would just gloss over all that, so it's kinda nice seeing it take the time to establish the character. But honestly, this series looks better than it really has any right to. The action is incredibly well paced, superbly choreographed, and has strong shot choice and direction to really sell the desperation and hopelessness in this series. Light, color, framing, it all sets the mood so well in this anime. I mostly expected this to follow a goofy route based on the title, so I was exceptionally pleased with this result. This is definitely a cut above the typical anime in the reincarnated villainous genre, and well worth a look, especially if you're into these sort of shows. You know, I need something kinda silly to lighten the mood, so Mr. Villain's Day Off is up next. An evil alien organization sets out to wipe out humanity and sends the general to carry out that mission, but this dude just wants to enjoy his day off, and not even the local Sentai team will stop him from doing so. This is another series with a fairly goofy premise that's more slice of life. The humor comes from seeing characters you wouldn't normally see in these sort of situations, with that whole subverting expectations and such. I mean, we've seen these before, hell, even in the Sentai genre, but this one doesn't try to mingle with rom-com or adding commentary about black companies and other such systemic issues. It's a straightforward comedy using its premise, which gives it room to breathe. That's probably where it shines the most. The simplicity and light nature works well with this style of humor. That's not to say it's light on gags either. It packs quite a bit into an otherwise small package, and complementing that more is the art style. Again, keeping a more simple style lets the humor fly fast and sells the mood the series is setting. Yeah, it's not groundbreaking or great even, but it fits the vibe, and that's why I'm fine with it. If you're looking for a breezy comedy affair that isn't heavy on plot or other elements, while also having a soft spot for Sentai, is maybe just what you're looking for. And speaking of light comedy, Hokkaido girls are super adorable follows that trend. A guy moves to Hokkaido and bumps into a girl at a bus stop. The fact that she's rocking the stereotypical gyaru style and below freezing temperatures gets our boy excited in more ways than one, which is great for him, because she turns out to be a classmate in his new school. Honestly, I was surprised this wasn't more ecchi focused, and don't get me wrong, it still has its moments, but honestly that's for the best. We're dealing with yet another school comedy with romantic tensions, and the style is your more typical slice of life affair. The gags are light and about everyday situations, so it's grounded, but it's also a nice change of pace considering how gimmicky most comedies have been these days. Aside from that, it delivers on the promise in the title. Gyaru types in anime get a bad rap, and it's nice seeing one handled more like a normal teenager. The main dude unfortunately has a serious issue, that the falling snow has more personality than he does, so that sucks. As for the art itself, it's pretty. The character designs are well done, the animation is smooth, and overall just feels like a solid production, which is crazy considering the disconnect between the studios on this. Either way, the series knows what it's about and works to showcase the cuteness of the girls, while not cheaping out on the rest of the animation. An overall competent series that's easy to pick up if you're looking for a rom-com. Alright, let's keep it the whole rom-com thing, because next we've got the foolish angel dances with the devil. A demon infiltrates a human high school looking for pawns in Hell's war against heaven, but after bumping into the other recent transfer, he decides to recruit her because he's thinking with his dick. That always gets you in trouble in high school, but instead of getting a busty beauty under him, she turns out to be the very enemy he's recruiting to fight against, and thus begins the back and forth of a demon and angel as they flirt and fight. Honestly, this had potential. Past tense is key. The premise is a solid one to work off of, allowing for a good variety in humor and tension to create an engaging watch, but that would have required it to have solid characters to form that basis or actually utilize its premise well. It does not. Reading the description for this, seemed like I was in for a straight Good Omens meets Kaguya-sama Love is War. Instead, it tries too hard to subvert expectations and just ends up cringy. Oh look, the angel's more demonic than the actual demon? Who could have seen that coming? Yeah, what we got was an abusive angel and love-struck demon. So, basically Nagatoro without the charm. The comedy is obnoxious, the core cast has zero personality, and that just leaves the animation. So how's that? Pretty bad. Simplistic models, stiff animation, and really boring shots and framing. When the series tries hard at action, it dresses it up somewhat. Oh, so that's where the budget went. But even these are fades, cuts, and post-production movements to try and amp it up. So yeah, this was a letdown. There's a lot better offerings than this in pretty much every category, so I can't really see why anyone would pick this up over those. Let's try to salvage this with our second villainous anime this season, Villainous Level 99. I may be the hidden boss, but I'm not the Demon Lord. You know the tune by now. Girl regains her memories from modern Japan and realizes she's the hidden boss in an otome game. So she decides to train herself and not stand out until her absurd stats come to light, and everyone assumes she's the Demon Lord. So can she avoid all the drama and live a peaceful life? Probably not. Well, let's find out for sure. This one really commits to the act by starting the series from the game's main character's perspective, even playing the game's opening before the show's opening, before switching over to the actual main character of the show to set the mood, which is actually a neat touch. I like that. As for what this one offers compared to others, I'd say it takes its time setting up the series, something I've noticed a lot more this season, giving a lot of character archetypes that would have normally been glossed over or just made into gags, actual personality and motive in the story, which then works as we switch over to the real main character with that in mind. In terms of Isekai, it has some of the more overused tropes, but doesn't really seem to be relying on them as a crutch, which gives this a leg up, as it's trying to tell its own story instead of replicate one we've seen before. And personally, I think the more stoic, deadpan lead works well, as it's, again, something different while fitting with the story's style. As for the animation, it's fairly standard. It's not flashy and mostly invisible, which works for an anime like this. I don't think this will be a great isekai, but if you're looking for a competent one, this is probably worth a shot, especially if you really like the villainous genre. Let's take a break from fantasy again to discuss the very likely reality facing most otakus: virginity into their 30s with cherry magic. A guy makes it to 30 without doing the deed, and that grants him the power to read minds. Which sounds pretty cool, until you realize it's everyone he touches. Great, say goodbye to crowded spaces. And things only get more complicated when he gets curious enough to see what his popular coworker is thinking. And it turns out it's doing the nasty with him. Specifically, well damn, a one-sided gay office romance? Let's see if this turns mutual. Off the bat, he's a pretty depressed loser type struggling at his job, and suddenly noticing the successful coworker actually likes him sort of makes him question his own sanity, which I mean, that's a very realistic outcome. Suddenly he can read minds and the one dude at work likes him? Yeah, I'd think I was crazy too. On top of him not being gross with the whole mind reading thing, makes him a lot more likable than you would otherwise think. But the guy crushing on him is legit in love, not just being a perv, because he recognizes the guy's hard work and wants to support him. I like that it has a decent foundation. Overall, the series got a few laughs, and the cast are relatable enough that it stands out, utilizing its premise as a catalyst and source of comedy to build a surprisingly realistic approach to love for somebody with zero experience. As for the art and animation, it's on the plain side. Seihei is the studio here, and they don't really have a good track record for producing visually appealing work, but it's competent enough that I'm not distracted at least. If you like boys love anime, this is an easy pickup, but if you're looking for something a bit different to fill out your romance wish list, this wouldn't be a bad choice this season. You know what genre we haven't really seen in a while on this channel? Sci-fi, and Metallic Rouge is here to save the day on that front, an original series by Bones about android and human tensions. Our main girl is one such android, and she's off to Mars with her partner to kill some hostile androids who are opposing the government, or some shit. So this series flies fast with information, but it's all handled incredibly well so you're not left asking questions. Love that. There's elements of terrorism, withholding the fuel for androids because humans can get high off it, and hints of a bigger story going on that we're gonna learn as this progresses. Hell, the obvious villain type being cartoonishly over the top adds both menace and laughs, so it's an extremely good action mystery thriller sort of show that has some really cool elements on top of that to make it more unique. The two leads have excellent chemistry of rolling with whatever the other says, making a nice back and forth for some levity to these situations, when also knowing when to be serious to build up hype for that action. and there's a really solid balance in tone to keep a nice flow with the story. That way it matches. Bones does amazing work as a studio. The series has pretty much everything you're looking for in a well-produced anime. Strong character designs, beautiful art, fluid animation, interesting shot composition, excellent directorial decisions, and an overall interesting aesthetic. It feels cinematic, and that's great for the style of story they're going for. There's really not much else to say. This was a fantastic first episode, and I'm genuinely looking forward to what happens next. If you're looking for a non-fantasy action series this season, this is a no-brainer to pick up. Alright, we can't avoid it any longer. Let's get back into my fantasy hell. The Witch and the Beast is next. In a world with witches who curse people, one of the few surefire ways to break a curse permanently is to kiss the witch who cast it. Two people work for a shady organization that handles magic-related problems while looking for the witch who cursed the main girl. Pretty straightforward goal. So how does it shape up? Well, off the bat, this series has a more unique flair than other fantasy series out this season, following a more industrialized and even modern time period instead of the typical medieval setting. Aside from that, the characters are all easily identifiable, but pack strong motives that carry them through the story, and it wastes no time setting up said story and world. While not as masterful as the last entry, I like a lot of the framing devices it uses, kind of painting it as a legend or storybook, and it's certainly effective and cool, especially once it actually breaks into the action. The magic in this world is interesting at least. It's not really unique, but there's more at play than other series that deal with magic, allowing for greater creativity beyond barriers and elemental blasts. But there is a real focus on story here, which grabs the viewers and pulls them in quick. The studio behind this one has, frankly, an awful track record for animation, but I'm not going to judge this based on that record because just looking at it tells us they're putting in the effort. Clean line work, a good flow to the action, and ultimately delivers on what this story is aiming for. I'm liking this so far, and if you're in the market for an action fantasy series, this is worth a look. Another isekai for the road, I guess. The Weakest Tamer began a journey to pick up trash is about a girl reincarnated into another world, where stars are basically their power level. She's got no stars, so that means she's weak as hell. And when trying to not die, she flees into the forest and finds a slime just weak enough for her to tame. So now she does that, and she's got a friend to travel around with and save more trash mobs. This is definitely a case of a series where the description doesn't really do it justice. This picks up with the girl fleeing from her village since they're trying to kill her for not having a star, and striking out on her own. But there's definitely a sense of melancholy and, hell, even inevitability in the way this is presented. That shows a lot more thought than other trash isekais. In fact, the series doesn't even really present itself as an isekai, as the most we get is her talking to her past life, like it's another person. So if you're going into this expecting some wholesome and sweet isekai that's all laid back, you're gonna be disappointed. This is a fight for survival, where nothing's really given to the lead, she's at a complete disadvantage, and her pluckiness actually makes this work well. I'm reminded of early parts of Ascendance of a Bookworm in that regard. Animation for this is pretty surprising. This is Studio Masquette's first anime, and they're definitely pulling out all the stops. The cinematography is on point, the actual animation is fluid, and there's a lot of care put into how this is presented. So yeah, I was definitely pleasantly surprised here. Honestly, this has the potential to be a sleeper hit. I'll say keep your eye on it. So that's it. We've reached the end of my list this go around. There's a lot this season that stands out, and some that might be worth sticking around to see just how bad of a train wreck it is. But you know what I'm excited for? The fact we've gotten less sequels overall, because for the past few years we've been drowning in them. But tell me your thoughts down below. Obviously I didn't watch everything this season, so what are you looking forward to? I'd love to hear it. For now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with the link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. Speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to JMonth33A, Pokeflute, Robin DBL, Samuel Chen, and Vonstrom for their continued support. Thanks for watching.